And that's what she said to me over the phone. And that is what she emailed to me. I spoke with your Aunt Holly and about the scratch on Oliver's face, and she said it was from playing. There's nothing wrong. So both my Aunt Holly Avila was being forced to call it a scratch, and she knew it wasn't. But Michelle Erickson is the person who's supposed to report crimes of children, who works for the state of Washington, who also, by the way, I think worked for Kate Middleton. Because later, it's like, you know, she's having her honeymoon on what? Seychelles Island. You know, that is a little bit of a stretch when I just say it like that. But Michelle was connected to people who just wanted to torture my family and call me crazy and do favors for people that she thought she could have favors done, you know, would do favors for her in return. And she got her start on an island in Seattle, in the Seattle area. It was like Bainbridge Island or a different island. And that's where she first did one of her internships for CPS. So she was for the U.S. Navy. So then Michelle Erickson is passing this entire incident off as a scratch and calling me, using the opportunity to make it sound like if you just read the emails and you didn't have any evidence, you would think that maybe Camille Garrett is crazy. How come her own aunt is saying it's a scratch, and this social worker that works for the state, Michelle Erickson, how come Michelle Erickson would say it's a scratch? Doesn't she care about kids? No. Michelle Erickson does not care about kids. Michelle Erickson cares about food. She cares about feeding herself. She does not care about kids. I guess that's how she medicates herself after she does these horrible things to children. Abuses their trust. And basically she just threw at me the exact same thing. You should be glad that he's with the Avilas, with family. It could be a lot worse. And if you think I'm bad, you don't know how bad the people are who supervise me. That's basically what she said more than once. And I think I've said before on one of these clips, if that's the case, then why didn't Michelle Erickson report any of this to the FBI? She's clearly very comfortable committing crimes and allowing crimes to occur against children. And then again, let's remember that Judge Alicia Nakata was trying to protect Michelle Erickson from being exposed by trying to quash my freedom of speech and prevent me and keep me from saying anything about Michelle. And then, of course, Judge Hotchkiss was doing whatever Marianne McIntosh told him to do, and Marianne McIntosh is related to the Wenatchee Police Department. That's just all great. It gives you a lot of confidence. Don't you just feel like moving to Wenatchee now? So I got these emails from Michelle Erickson, and then I uploaded the evidence that I had that showed what kind of a cut, what kind of a quote-unquote scratch was on my son's face. And people were shocked. And I think a lot of people didn't know what to do. So then Marianne McIntosh made sure there was another hearing, and she brought it up to the judge, and I tried to enter this evidence into the court file on behalf of my son who is the child that needs the protection, and Judge Hotchkiss said no, absolutely not. Judge Hotchkiss is pretty much like got blood. He has blood all over his hands. No, you may not put this information into the public record. And it's because you violated my order. And I said, Your Honor, you said not to take photos in the visitation room, and I took them in the bathroom, and that was outside of the visit. We stopped the visit. The visitation monitor was no longer taking notes, and we had a bathroom break. And I took the photo during a bathroom break. Ms. Garrett, if you do this one more time, you will go to jail. And I don't think that you want to go to jail if you want to continue these visits with your son. So he basically, from that point on, made it clear that there would be no documentation of torture against my son going into the record. And if I dared to put anything else, to do anything else, and take any other kind of evidence of torture done to my son, I was going to go to jail. And then the next thing that happened to my son was he was punched in the face. And that's when I should have broken the law. That is when I should have broken Judge Hotchkiss's illegal order telling me not to document evidence of torture to my son. And I didn't because I had already documented torture to my son. Nobody did anything about it. So what was the point? I was going to go to jail, and more harm was going to come to my son, and didn't matter if I documented it or not. What the military and the state was trying to prove to me was that you go on ahead and sign yourself into jail. Do us a favor. Because it doesn't matter what evidence you have against your son, you can already see that we're not doing anything about it. Because we're behind it. So when my son showed up with an enormous black eye on the entire side of his face, covering about 1/4 of his face, I mean the entire section of his eye was black and purple and blue. And I said, Oliver, what happened? And he said that it happened at a party, and it was a man who came around the corner and basically punched him in the eye. And then he said, when I give you a pow, he gave me a pow. He didn't say it was Pablo. He knew who Pablo was. He would have, if it had been Pablo that had done that to my son, he would have said Pablo. And instead, what he was being told was that if he talked about what torture was being done to him, then Pablo was probably going to spank him. Because Pablo and my Aunt Holly were being intimidated and forced to punish my son if he talked about what torture was being done to him by others. One time my son was being led away from me from a visit after that time, and he was told to go with Pablo, and I was sitting outside on the bench, and he was trying to run away from Pablo with all of his strength. He was running back. He turned back and saw me, and he kept calling out to me, and he was twisting his entire body and trying to run back to me. And Pablo held on to his hand firmly and took him to the truck. My son looked frantic and panicked. The only reason he would be panicked leaving a CPS office with my uncle, Pablo, would be because the state has been using my aunt and uncle and torturing and intimidating them into allowing them to do horrific things to my child. And Oliver didn't feel safe, and he knew that, at least when he was with me, he was not being tortured. The other thing that happened, after somebody punched him in the face, they continued to bruise his legs and his arms. And my son then ended up with, he showed up at a visit smelling like perm solution. And he started smelling like perm solution when I was curling my hair, and it had something to do with, I had gone online and somebody on the East Coast had asked me if I curled my hair very much, I guess. And they, at different times, people from the Post Pub were asking questions that had something to do with the Wales people, like William of Wales and Charles of Wales and Diana. And I was curious one time, so I went onto this one site, and this was later in, when I was back in Wenatchee, because I didn't really look anything up about anyone except Diana until after my fiance Alvaro had left. And then I started to feel like, I think that my attempt to be impartial towards Diana and thinking about her case, or what I thought was thinking about her case, or relating to her as, you know, someone defamed for being mentally ill when maybe they weren't really, or not as badly as someone thought, wanted to make him out to be. I didn't want her position to really influence what I thought about her as a person, just a regular person. And so I was keeping, like, most of her contacts and everybody out of it. Like, I wasn't doing research on any of it. First time I ever heard the Middleton name was in the Post Pub. I remember I heard it one time, but I didn't know anything about any of them. I remember hearing that name. And otherwise I wouldn't have even remembered it. But I think that the reason I remembered it was because someone looked for a reaction for such a long time from me, and I was just sort of like, didn't have one because I didn't know what the big deal was about this Middleton person that they were talking about. I mean, they could have been talking about the librarian that was 2 blocks away around the corner, and that's how interested I was. So it wasn't until I was in Wenatchee that I started looking some things up. And that was also about the time that my son was getting tortured.